Welcome to the Food Junkies podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others. And hopefully the message will spread.
Welcome to the Food Junkies podcast. My name is Dr. Vera Tarman, and I am your host today, speaking with Dr. Erin Louise Bellamy about metabolic psychiatry, and specifically the use of ketogenic metabolic therapy for mental health. Dr. Bellamy earned her PhD in psychology from the University of East London, where she studied the effects of ketogenic diets on depression, following a master's in psychiatric research focusing on eating disorders. Since 2014, she has been researching and applying ketogenic metabolic therapy in clinical settings. She is now CEO of IKRT, an international organization pioneering ketogenic metabolic therapy for psychiatric conditions, and also serves as a research fellow at the University of East London. Dr. Bellamy is also an associate professor of the British Psychological Society and a member of the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. So welcome, Erin.
Thank you so much, Vera. It's absolutely lovely to be here. It's wonderful.
We always like to start with a personal question, like what got you into the field? So what got you into the field of metabolic psychiatry, the ketogenic solution, and also the overlap into eating disorders?
Yeah, absolutely. So the overlap into eating disorders was probably the first thing. So my undergraduate in psychology and then my master's in psychiatric research, both of those, when we had the opportunity to do our thesis, I was so interested in eating behavior of students, eating behavior of individuals when they had like a gap year, individual eating behaviors under stress. My PhD or my master's was focused around alexithymia and eating disorders and understanding and labeling emotions. So I always had an interest within psychology, specifically on eating behaviors and eating disorders. And so back in 2013, 2014, once I had finished my master's degree, I decided that I wanted to work with people within the National Health Service, become a clinical psychologist, and work with people implementing therapies to help them. And so I had been working for a year or so within the National Health Service on some psychiatric inpatient wards, just to get a better understanding as to how it worked, how did the system work, and where I could see myself, what areas in particular. And it was then, this is probably about 2015 or so, it was then that I came across New Atkins for New You, the Atkins diet, the South Beach diet, all of these diets that were turning the food pyramid upside down. And with my curious nature, I decided, okay, let's see if there's any research behind this. Does this work for weight loss? Does it work for type 2 diabetes? And if so, how does that compare to what we are told to eat? And so I went on a bit of a long quest to try and figure it all out. And in doing so, I came across the ketogenic diet. And as soon as I came across the ketogenic diet and I started looking at whether or not the ketogenic diet had been implemented within a research setting for psychiatric illness, I came across a paper from 1965 that showed when people who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and who were considered as treatment resistant, when they were placed on a ketogenic diet for 2 weeks, their symptoms improved. And then when their diet was reintroduced, the standard diet, their symptoms worsened. And so really that for me was the catalyst that sent me on my way. That's how I fell into my PhD and so on. So it was, I think it was down to PubMed just showing me what I needed to see, I think way back when, that kind of pushed me into this field.
Okay, you started in the eating disorder field, and the eating disorder field literature tends to focus less on food and more on behaviors. Did that butt against your training in your master's?
Yeah, very much. So you're quite right. It's all about the behavior and how you're feeling and the guilt and the shame. And depending on which eating disorder you're looking at, right, the behaviors that are associated with that. And I think that's why I found the food aspect so interesting, because the eating disorder focus on behavior, plus the fact that I was coming from a psychology background, not a dietetics or nutrition background. So I was focused on, it's meant to be biopsychosocial, but really it's psycho and social and not much bio. I was intrigued by the biological side. I was intrigued by the food and the nutrition and what it does. And I think that's why I went to that side, trying to learn a little bit more about how does this food impact us? How does it impact the brain? Because I had already got a bit of a sense as to how the psycho and the social could be involved. And I could see, for the most part, that our therapies were working to some extent, but maybe not working for everyone long term. And I thought, there's got to be something in this bio section that I'm missing or that we're missing, which is why I wanted to explore it further.
This podcast, we're specifically interested in the food addiction angle. Did you embrace that in your changing, morphing into from the eating disorder focus to a more bio keto focus? Where did the food addiction piece fit into that?
It didn't at the time. And I think that's because nobody was talking about it. So this is 2014-ish, or I hadn't come across them yet. I was listening to a lot of podcasts, but it was mainly ketogenic diet for type 2 diabetes or low carb diets for type 2 diabetes. There wasn't much for mental health or for mood, and I wasn't hearing much about eating disorders. And so it wasn't until much further along when I started thinking specifically about binge eating disorder and just how the rates are definitely much higher than we are led to believe. There's so many overlaps in symptomatology. It's difficult to get a diagnosis. And I just thought, I understand anorexia nervosa and bulimia and some others, but I really was having a bit of a struggle getting my head around binge eating and trying to understand why they were saying that the percentage of people that had it was so low, when actually, if I looked in my immediate circle of colleagues and peers, I was seeing behavior in people, eating behavior in people, that to me would suggest that there might be a food addiction element. But that term food addiction wasn't really there.
It's an interesting point that you make, because there were people, I was talking in my first book came out in 2014, Phil Wardell in the States, but there wasn't the exposure that there is now. We were in our individual silos talking to ourselves. It wasn't really until 2020 and onwards that we started actually, oh my God, you've been talking about this forever, so have I. Yeah.
That's exactly how I felt with my PhD too. I think all the terrible things of COVID, but the fact that suddenly we were able to get on a video call, we were able to connect and use technology to connect with people across the world and say exactly that. Wow, you've been doing this too for so long. And I think the past 5 years, we've really been able to push a lot of the fields forward because of that. Because you're quite right. Up until that point, we were in our silos just singing aloud, but very few people were able to hear us apart from who was in our immediate vicinity.
I'm discovering, as I'm looking more into academic writing, there's so many more open source journals access. And then when you do a search, I'm discovering papers that were written in 2009, 2010, going, they were talking about food addiction. Why didn't I see this? I didn't, because it wasn't open access in the way that it is now. You had to actually go to a library and know it's just opened up the universe.
Yeah, exactly. And also, even the terminology, like the terminology that we're now using and the words that we are sharing with one another helps us to search for papers. You had your own phrases that you were using in your writing, and then maybe say Ashley Gearhart had her ways and other people that had their ways. And because you weren't reading each other's papers or didn't have access, the language wasn't shared. Whereas now it is, and therefore it's fantastic, right? Now we can finally use the same language, get on the same page, and push the field forward in that way.
Good. Now to the topic at hand, which is ketogenic metabolic therapy. Can you define that term? And then also specifically what you mean by keto, because there's low carb, there's keto, it's clean keto, dirty keto. Define what it is and add the carb count, just so that people know, because it's used all over the place.
It's a bit of a mess, I'd agree. And I think that there's a reason for that. So if we take a step back, we've got like metabolic psychiatry, this new field, and it is relatively new. Dr. Shabani Sethi at Stanford coined the term metabolic psychiatry just a couple of years ago.
Different than ketogenic psychiatry?
Yes, yeah. So
Yeah, okay.
metabolic psychiatry is like we can look at it as like an umbrella term. And then, so what that means is we're looking at improving mental health outcomes, improving mental health symptoms and diagnoses by improving metabolic health. So if we look at metabolic health and mental health, we can see that both of those, the deterioration of those rise on the rise. Metabolic health is plummeting and mental health diagnoses are rising almost in tandem. And so by using metabolic therapies to improve metabolism, which is how we use nutrients and so on to function, by improving the metabolism, we can also improve our mental health because, as many people would agree, brain body are connected despite what we've been told for many years in psychology. So metabolic psychiatry is like the overarching field.
Yeah.
Underneath that, you have many different metabolic therapies that can be used in order to improve somebody's metabolic health. And one of the largest metabolic therapies, or the one that I believe is the biggest lever to pull, should we say, is ketogenic metabolic therapy or ketogenic therapy. And so when we think about ketogenic therapy, then we think about the ketogenic diet. So ketogenic therapy, we're one step down from metabolic psychiatry, okay? Ketogenic therapy, what this means is we are putting somebody into a state of nutritional ketosis, which just means we are getting the body to move over to burning fat and creating ketones for energy, okay? There are many different ways that we can do that. We can use diet, we can use intermittent fasting, we can use some supplements to help. But pretty much if we pull that all together, that approach is ketogenic therapy. It's putting that person in that ketogenic state. Now, to answer your question about the different diets, this is where people get confused. There's dirty keto, clean keto, classic keto, and so on. Historically, the ketogenic diet was used in quite a restrictive manner to improve seizure control in children with treatment-resistant epilepsy. And the diet had to be medically supervised. It was very high in fat, quite low in protein, and almost no carbs at all. And with that, there were some negative side effects, right? But seizure control, so you got to weigh it up. From that, if we loosen up a little, bring the fat down a little, be a little bit more liberal with protein, but still keep the carbohydrates quite low. So anything from less than 50 grams of carbs, even down to less than 20 grams of carbs per day. That's where we are sitting with the approach for improving mental health. So it's less restrictive. There are less side effects as a result. It still needs supervision, in my opinion, and professional guidance, but it's not as restrictive as the classic approach.
So the carbs would be between 20 and 50 a day.
Yeah, and some people need less than 20.
Yeah.
But over time, you can adjust, right? You can bring in other things that can help you get away with some more carbs, depending on what you're doing. But under 50, and then for some under 20. And then both of those diets are very different to the diet that you and I have seen, your listeners have seen plastered on magazines and online for the past 10 years, which is eat this and lose 30 pounds in 30 days, just eat burger patties and bacon from these fast food restaurants, and you're going to be healthy, lose weight, and look great and feel fine. Very different. That's quite a lax approach. It doesn't really require tracking of ketones in the blood. It's not really a therapeutic intervention. Whereas the ketogenic therapy to improve mental health outcomes is a little more nuanced. There's tracking involved, there's supervision involved, there are specific supplements and so on that you have to take to support this state.
I've come across the term therapeutic carbohydrate restriction. Is that like a liberal version of the ketogenic diet that you've just described?
Yeah, so therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, this is a term I think that the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners is really trying to spread internationally.
Yeah.
It's more so alluding to bringing your carbs down to maybe 50 to 90 grams per day
Oh, so even
for
higher.
overall improvement of health.
Yeah.
And then from there, if there are specific health goals or health issues you're trying to target, you might need a slightly different approach. But for the most part, yes, therapeutic carbohydrate restriction is definitely a part of the process, especially in the beginning. We're
Okay.
not just going to jump into ketosis. We need to gradually bring those carbohydrates down.
Now, as a sort of clinical example, you brought up the idea about schizophrenia. Metabolic therapy can help a condition like schizophrenia. You said that it can reduce symptoms. And you also mentioned that there's often a twofold rise. There's metabolic disease and mental health disease. Would it be fair to say then that a lot of schizophrenia has metabolic disease, i.e. diabetes? Pushing that.
You're on the right path. It's quite nuanced and we don't know the full extent. What we do know is that across all mental health diagnoses, so everything from schizophrenia, bipolar, affective, and so on, there are shared mechanistic pathways. So there are about 5 or 6 right now that the field have identified. One of them being mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance. And if you find something that can improve or reverse the insulin resistance and improve the health of the mitochondria, then that in turn can improve symptoms in said individuals. So, for example, with schizophrenia, there is some research to show that insulin resistance, mitochondrial dysfunction is at the core, just the same as neuroinflammation or
And the way that we're saying dementia, Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. So could we say that a lot of mental health illness is also a type 3 diabetes manifestation? Or again, am I pushing that?
I think at least in part, because it may not be the full story, right? We
Yes.
can't be so sure as to say it definitely is. We don't know. I think it's too early to tell. But we have research that points in that direction. And also the results that we are seeing clinically suggest that it's at least playing a part. For some people, it seems to be all metabolic, right? You improve somebody's metabolism and their symptoms go away. And then for other people, it seems to be that you employ ketogenic therapy or other metabolic therapies and their symptoms improve significantly, but don't take them the whole way. They may need in tandem some other therapy or some pharmacology, something like that alongside.
So here's where I get confused as a clinician. So if a person has schizophrenia or bipolar 2 that's quite unregulated, we're often encouraged to prescribe an antipsychotic, which we know causes metabolic dysfunction. It puts a person in pre-diabetic state. So how do we know that meds are not actually contributing to this whole scenario? And what do we do if that's the case?
What do we do? Yeah. How do we know? It's a chicken and egg situation, isn't it? Because we are not so far ahead in the field that we are doing a fasting insulin when they present in the room before they are taken in for a section, for example. We should be, but that's often not the first thing on our mind. So until we can test at the point of the presentation, and before they take any medications, we don't know what comes first. However, what do we do about it? We know, just like you've mentioned, these medications, many of them come with a high metabolic price tag, often from hours after the first dose, they're metabolically impaired. And so this is what I'm so excited about. Yes, I would love to see ketogenic therapy as being do this first or do this as a preventative measure. But we also can, and I see many people where people are on medications, they've gained 50, 80 pounds, right? They're not feeling great, and they still have symptoms because the medication hasn't helped 100%. And we can use ketogenic therapy to improve their metabolism. And so what you end up doing is they're taking the medication, which seems to be helping to a point. And then we are using ketogenic therapy to offset those negative side effects, which is great because if they're getting benefits from the medication, you'd want them to continue if they are feeling good, because we're just looking for people to feel good and have something that deals with the metabolic side effects. And so it helps improve metabolism while they still take that medication. Having said that, there are also people who ketogenic therapy seems to be a stronghold for them. It has antidepressant properties and so on, stabilizes mood. And some people have been able, with the support of their psychiatrist, to very slowly, even slower than normal, reduce medications and
Yeah.
end up on a low dose or even come off
You
diet.
explain how does ketogenic diet affect mood? I think about addiction. Before we even knew it was called ketogenic, we knew that a food addiction diet, you just remove the refined carbs and sugar and the cravings went away. But then how does depression and anxiety get adjusted when you go on a refined carbohydrate diet?
Yeah, there are two things there. So the first thing is, with food addiction, we know, yes, if you remove it, if you have abstinence from that, the cravings will eventually subside. There are changes that will happen, dopamine resets and so on. But also, and I'm waiting for this study to be done, and I don't think I have time to do it, but it would be great. If you were to compare removing it, abstinence and a low carb diet versus a ketogenic diet, I believe we would see even greater changes around control and being able to remain abstinent, because these ketones there are so many mechanisms that are at play with the ketone molecules that are produced on a ketogenic diet. One of them, so this is to the mood part, one of them is that they are anxiolytic. In other words, in research, it's been shown that the anxiety levels will reduce, specifically when given ketones, anxiety comes down. We know that GABA, so that neurotransmitter promoting relaxation and so on, goes up. So that also helps with keeping anxiety down. Our neurotransmitter glutamate, so super excitatory, not very pleasant, which is often so high in many people who have mental
Sugar
health
addiction.
diagnoses, right? That comes down and seems to regulate as the GABA goes up. So there's almost like a switch, a turnover. And then the ketones, aside from that, the ketones they have antidepressive properties. So if you administer them, depression levels will come down and symptoms will reduce. So when I was doing my PhD, which was specifically ketogenic diet on depression, as I said in the beginning, I was so interested in the biological side. I fell into trying to understand all the mechanisms. And I was like, okay, if these are the mechanisms of depression, what are the mechanisms of ketones that can counteract what's happening? And I spent hours, maybe days, making a big table and identifying them all. And I came up with about 52 mechanisms whereby depression is expressed and where ketones can counteract that mechanism.
So you're going beyond the theory of the serotonin theory of depression now, right?
Yeah, I am knee deep in just mechanisms, ketones, and just pure biology and metabolism. And at 52, then I reminded myself that I'm doing a psychology PhD. I'm not a biochemist. This is not what I need to be focusing on. But I share it because it's much more than we think. It's much more than we know. And we don't even know the half of what these ketones can do. Yes, it's not all about the ketones. There are other things that improve outcomes too, but the ketones are extremely powerful. And I think just having those on board with your therapy is likely to give better outcomes than not having them there.
Well, you mentioned GABA, you mentioned glutamate, but you didn't mention serotonin. So is essentially this keto model challenging the traditional view of how depression works? Or do ketones have an impact on serotonin as well?
We don't have research yet or I haven't seen it. Maybe we do. I don't have research yet that has looked at that. There are lots of research studies that are looking at different markers and looking at different neurotransmitters and trying to map it all out. But I think at this point we are further along with the GABA and the glutamate. And we know that ketones can regulate neurotransmitters. In other words, put them up when they're down, bring them down when they're up.
Yes.
But I haven't seen anything specifically looking at the serotonin side.
Okay, but you could say that the keto diet acts as an antidepressant where it regulates the levels of serotonin or whatever else that we're not measuring that's associated with serotonin.
Yeah, exactly. And I can say that with quiet confidence, because many years ago, one of the first papers that I came across from, I think maybe 2016, 2017, was titled the antidepressant effects of the ketogenic diet. And it was, at that point, it was a mouse model, but it was going through all the different ways that the ketones were showing their antidepressant effects. So yeah, I would be confident.
So question, you've been talking about keto, we can reduce our carbohydrates, but what about, are those supplements out there that you can get now, keto supplements where you can boost your, I don't know, MCT oil or just virtually keto supplements that are out there? Are they real? Do they actually have an impact?
I love this question because, as with any bandwagon, people are going to jump on it, and we have
Yeah.
to be really careful, because you don't want to mess around with your health, and you certainly don't want to mess around with your mental health, right? You want to make sure that you're doing things properly. When it comes to a therapeutic ketogenic diet for mental health, yes, there are some supplements that can help. So things like MCT oil, it's a great addition. It can help to increase your ketones, especially if you're eating out and you're not quite sure, you know, how many carbs are in your food and so on. You can use it in many different situations quite strategically to be helpful for you. On the flip side, there are lots of other exogenous ketones that you can drink in powder form.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. I've seen
And
a lot of influencers that are saying now, take this and you won't be hungry and you'll feel more energetic. And I think that sounds a little bit too much like snake oil.
yeah, you have to be careful, and there's definitely nuance, because
Mhm.
if you're not on a low carb or ketogenic diet and you take these exogenous ketones, you're taking in the ketones, and yes, it might suppress hunger for a little while, because ketones do suppress hunger, but your blood glucose levels are likely still quite elevated because you ate breakfast of cereal and toast. And what you end up then is with high glucose and high
Yeah,
ketones for
what
a
happens
time.
then? Yes.
Yeah, and then you've got energy toxicity. And so then your
My
body needs to
gosh.
make a decision, like, we should probably store the fat and the carbs that you ate earlier, because you just gave us lots of ketones that we have to use right
Ah,
away. So that's counterproductive. Okay. Some people will say, yes, I can eat less when I take these exogenous ketones and so on. But if you're following a standard diet with a lot of carbohydrates, you're not choosing which fuel source to use, and you really need to choose one. You can't run on both. If you're following a low carb or ketogenic diet, then it can be helpful in some circumstances. I don't like people to rely on them, one, because they're pricey and you'd be poor if you were using them every day, but also you want to train your body to be able to use its own ketones,
yes.
because then you can always remain in a state of ketosis and you're in control.
But
Then you use the exogenous ketones just strategically if you need them when traveling or something like that.
where I see them as potentially valuable is in two ways. One, that some people just cannot hit ketosis even if they eat 30 grams of carbohydrates for some reason, and this would give them that state of ketosis. I don't know if that little bit is useful then.
You're right, some people struggle to hit higher ketones, but often it's because the diet needs to be tweaked, or there are some supplements that you might need to help actually get the fat into the liver to create ketones.
Oh, I
Often
see.
people are missing that, and then when you give that, then their production goes up. And also, things like MCT oil would be better placed there, because it doesn't shoot your ketones up as high. It's a fat source, so you can still use it as
Yeah.
energy, and it's a little easier to manage than the exogenous ketones.
Yeah.
Having said that, the exogenous ketones, I think there are about 3 companies now that have been around for a very long time, with a lot of research behind them, high quality products. So there are some there. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be using them. I just think there's a time and a place, and we have to be quite strategic and know what we're doing. I don't think somebody should just go and buy them and start taking them just because so and so on YouTube said, I'm doing this, so should you.
I'm just thinking that those people that are struggling, it might be that they just need to increase their fat and reduce their
Yeah.
protein
Yeah.
along with their carbs. And then the other place where I've seen it is people who do intermittent fasting, because it allows you to not have to eat, not be hungry. The exogenous ketones might actually help you through that phase until your own ketones kick in and help you.
Yes, but then there's a little bit of a tricky spot, because when you take the exogenous ketones,
Uh-huh.
you stop making your own. So if
Oh,
you're doing intermittent fasting,
my gosh, I didn't know
then
that.
yeah, if you take the exogenous ketones, then you'll use those. And then once you've gone through that, then you'll go back to making your own. And we want the fasting because we want to ramp up our own production. This is where MCT oil comes in. So another green flag for MCT, because if you take MCT oil when you're fasting, you'll get a little bit of boost of ketones from the MCT oil, but it doesn't stop your endogenous production. It
Ah,
actually ramps up your endogenous production. So you get to take it and it helps curb your hunger. You can have it in a hot drink, that type of thing. You get a bit of a boost and it encourages your liver to ramp up the speed at which it creates its own ketones.
right.
And then that's more beneficial than having the exogenous ketones.
Okay. So can you see using endogenous ketones in a food addiction model where a person's struggling with their food, their sugar, they just can't get rid of the cravings? Does the ketogenic diet help with cravings beyond the obvious removing the
Yeah.
triggering food?
Yeah, it does. And Vera, this is what I am most excited about.
Okay, tell us about that.
It's so when you go into a state of ketosis and your ketones are up above 0.5, so you're in nutritional ketosis, what people tend to develop is, and I've collected lots of different examples over time, but the word that I've stopped on is buffer. So you end up with this buffer around you, almost like a suit of armor, when you are in a state of ketosis. And you don't get this if you're just low carb. You don't really get this if you've removed all of your trigger foods, right? You still, if you're faced with it, you still think, oh my gosh, got to do my rag list or got to do this, that, the other. With ketones and being in ketosis, this buffer is present. And what people experience in ketosis with this buffer is trigger foods and foods and people and events and situations that would have triggered people when they were not in ketosis,
Yeah.
triggered them to react quickly in a way that they would not have liked. In other words, they had no time to think it through, very reactionary. This buffer prevents them from doing that. So they can have somebody yelling at them here. And instead of screaming back at them, they're able to stop, think, decide how they want to respond, and then do that. They could have trigger foods all around them.
Yeah.
And instead of just going, oh, is anybody looking? I'm all in and going on autopilot, they can stop, think about what to do, think if there's any other tool that they can use, or make the decision to turn around and leave. So I've even had people who are 6 out of 6 on Craved, really high YFAS, and they have said to me that when they're in ketosis, they have been able, and I don't know why they did this because they really challenged themselves, but they're able to walk down the aisles of the supermarket, the ones where,
Yeah.
the aisles that we are trying to avoid, they're able to walk down there. And the quote that somebody gave me once was, it's like there's a pane of glass between me and that.
Wow.
And there's just, I'm not interested. I can walk down past it without a problem. But if the ketones drop, it's difficult. That buffer is gone.
It's buffer
And
gone.
also, if it's challenged, if somebody's waving something under your nose, right, okay, then it's going to take a little bit more, of your tools to try and get away from that. But in the first instance, it's able to be around those things because of that buffer and not engage. So I do think exogenous ketones may be helpful there to bring the ketones up at a time when you need it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but as long as you're still following a keto diet, they may just help you get that buffer more quickly because it takes a
Exactly.
while to become fat burning. It takes like at least 3 or 4 days, right?
Yeah,
And in between,
exactly.
you're going crazy with cravings because you're basically in withdrawal. But if
Yeah.
you cut the carbs, take the exogenous ketones, it might help you get through those first few days.
Yeah. So bring the diet down,
Yeah.
remove all the suspect foods, bring in MCT oil, ramp up the amount of fat that you're
Yes.
eating beyond what you even think is normal, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then yes, know that it's going to be a bit bumpy for a few days, but then if you are going to be in a position where you're going to be tempted or you feel like you need to fall into old behaviors like going to the shop or whatever, taking exogenous ketones just to give you a little bit extra until you've got in ketosis and brought your ketones up naturally, yes, might be quite helpful.
One of the biggest triggers during that time period is hunger. You feel hunger because you haven't gotten your natural ketones to subdue that hunger. Hunger is a big trigger to basically binge eating. So we want to have a treatment plan where the person does not feel hunger. They feel okay.
Exactly. That's what I say to everybody, because when they hear ketogenic therapy, they think ketogenic diet. And when they hear diet, then they think I don't get to eat much food. So I make sure that every step along the way, they are eating enough food. And I tell them, because they worry in the beginning, especially if weight's an issue, like especially if there's like a binge eating history, they worry, they think, oh, my weight's just going to go up, and up. If you're telling me I can eat until I'm satisfied, I don't even know when I'm satisfied.
Yes,
right?
exactly. That's the food addicts.
Exactly.
Paranoia,
And they say, and I say to them, listen, I give them a list and I say, you eat as much food from this list as possible until you're satisfied. And if that means eating every 3 hours for 5 days, fine. I promise you that your hunger is going to drop when you have ketones, and then things will balance out, and they do. So it's just about building that trust right in the beginning and holding their hand through that first week or two.
Now, the way that you're talking about the buffer, the suit of armor, I hear similar language with the GLP-1s. The food noise is gone. There's that element of how did this happen that I can actually walk through a corridor of chips and whatnot and not want this stuff. So how does the GLP-1 effect play into this, or does it? And what are your opinions about GLP-1s in this larger context?
Yeah. So I'm excited to hear things like that people are saying, like the food noise is gone and so on, mainly because I think it's bringing more attention to the term food noise. So people can really understand what that is and realize that they're not alone. Because as I said in the beginning, I think way more people are dealing with this than is reported.
Yes.
I prefer ketogenic therapy to GLP-1s, mainly because ketogenic diets are lean mass preserving, muscle sparing, whereas a GLP-1 is not. People lose lean mass and fat.
And bone. Let's not forget the bone.
Exactly. And as we get older, that muscle is a prized possession. We don't want to be losing that. It's very difficult to put it back on. So what I like the fact that people are talking about the GLP-1s and that there's opened up this wider conversation about the food noise, because then I can come along and say, listen, we've got a nutritional intervention that has very little side effects if implemented safely, carefully, and with support, and is sustainable long-term with accountability and support, and is likely going to give you more or less the same benefits as this GLP-1. It's improving metabolic health. It's helping to lose weight if you do the food in the way that it needs to bring the weight down. It's bringing the food noise down. It's sustainable. Do you need to be on a ketogenic diet forever? If it helps with the food noise and keeps that away, great. But you have to be on a GLP-1 forever too. And so if you're to weigh them up, I'm going with the diet that still nourishes me with nutritious food. With a GLP-1, the appetite is seriously reduced, which is why people are losing weight. But also research came out the end of last year showed that after a period of time on a GLP-1, people's cravings for carbohydrates increase.
It's a ceiling effect, isn't it?
Exactly. And it seems to be the cravings for carbs increase, and there's actually an aversion to fat and protein that develops.
Oh, really? Really?
And you would think many clinicians were thinking, oh, it's just people who've been on it for a long time. They're just trying to get away with smaller portions of carbs now because they're not going to overeat. But no, it's because there are cravings for carbs. Perhaps my theory is perhaps it's because they're looking for quick energy. But then there's also an aversion to protein and fat, which is quite strange. And I don't know all the ins and outs of that. But what you have there then is being on the GLP long term with the aversion to the 2 macronutrients, which are essential for your health, and not being nourished. So if you come up, you're going to be starving, and then you're constantly losing muscle mass bone and fat. And I don't know, that's so far away from good metabolic health.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm going to beat the drum on ketogenic therapies instead. Are they comparable in terms of reducing food noise? We would need to do the study. But the ketogenic diet, if you get ketones up high enough, that food noise does appear to reduce.
Yeah,
So
good.
yeah,
I'm
we
glad
could
about
go
that. And I do worry also about the long-term effects of GLP-1s. We just don't know. And what we
No.
do know does frighten me to some degree. I mean, we could have the conversation about microdosing, but I want to ask something else first.
Yeah.
With this ketogenic diet, where it sounds like the main contributor here to getting ketones is high enough fat and protein, but the main ingredient is fat. So how can a person who wants to be whole food plant-based, is it possible, even when they're eating good carbohydrates, not the refined garbage, is it possible to follow a diet to get the metabolic effects of a ketogenic diet? Can you get the proteins that you need without adding the carbs with it?
Mm-hmm. You can, but it's more difficult and it's more restrictive because you're already removing the carbs. And now, if you're already removing the animal matter, right? And then you're
Yes.
also removing the carbs. So from an enjoyment perspective, it's quite limited and therefore more difficult. However,
But if you do like lentils and stuff like that, can you get enough protein without the additional carbs
yeah,
to get
just
ketones?
about, but you have to be careful. So when we're pushing up ketones, we can use the diet, right? But then we can also use things like the intermittent fasting. And
Okay.
so when you have somebody who's vegan, for example, a vegan diet is not a nutritionally complete diet. There's a significant amount of supplementation that needs to go along in order for the person to reach nutritional completeness. So there's a lot of supplementation. We can put the diet together so that it's really high fat. We rely quite heavily on MCT oil because MCT oil will offset the higher carb intake of the individual. So it's a very high fat, including a lot of MCT oil, and then normal moderate protein, and then it's slightly higher carb, but the MCT offsets it.
Yes.
And then we bring in intermittent fasting to help to push the ketones up further, give a little bit of a bolster.
What kind of intermittent fasting? Like a 18-6 hour?
So it definitely varies. We start off really, really small because you've got to build up. You can't just jump into a long fast. But because everybody's metabolism is different and their medications and the impact on their metabolism is different too. It just depends on how long they need to fast plus their diet to get or equals X amount of ketones. So we'll play around with intermittent fasting, maybe 12 hours, 14, 16, 18, maybe even up to, I don't really like to do one meal a day because you can't get everything in, but on occasion, something like that, just to help push the ketones up if there are more carbs that are being taken in. So it's doable. When I speak with people, I just tell them that the nutrients that we are getting from our diet, they are available in animal sources or bioavailable in animal sources. And that's the easiest way. Like, we're trying to heal the brain. We don't want to make it any more difficult than it is.
Yes.
So if you're not 100% tied to that lifestyle, then I really would implore somebody to have flexibility. Still buy the best quality that you can with your budget, of course, but to try and be a little more open-minded and flexible with the food choices. But if somebody's very set on it, I will still work with them and support them. It's still doable, and people do seem to have good effects.
Good.
It's just a little more challenging, as you would expect.
Now, the way that you've described it, I can see that the two traditional forces that you have to work against are traditional psychiatry, which wants to do meds. They don't want to do nutritional psychiatry first. And of course, the bariatric physician community, which now is really just interested in the GLP-1s. Is there any movement in either of those two big camps towards accepting nutritional ketones?
I don't know. I'm forever the optimist. I'm a very optimistic person, so I would like to say yes, but I'm not seeing it. There's a lot of people trying, and there are some people in both of those communities that are interested, right? They're like, oh, something else that could help, or something as an adjunct, or it's interesting, but it's not as high as I would like, as you can imagine. And to be honest, I've been quite shocked by how closed-minded people are, even when we know traditional therapies
Aren't
don't work
working.
the way
Yeah.
they should. Yeah. So you would imagine that if you had started that career, that you would be open-minded to anything that could help. And maybe it's time in the game, I don't know, but I don't see that as much as I thought that I would. Having said that, young practitioners coming
Uh-huh.
through now, they're hearing more and more about it, and it seems to be the younger ones that are more interested. They're
Yeah.
curious, they want to know more. So I think as long as we keep shouting as loud as we can together and explaining that brain and body are connected and metabolism is extremely important, then I think we will start to move the needle. But for example, I get questions all the time, like, how long is it until ketogenic therapy is going to be on the NHS and I
Yeah.
can go and get that as part of my service? It's
I don't know.
No, there are too many bigger forces at play,
Yeah.
that means it's not going to be anytime soon,
Yeah.
right? I
I
hope for it to be in the future, but
Yes.
not.
Oddly, we may start to see some movement in the States with the introduction with Kennedy's pushing
Yeah,
for low carb. And he's getting a lot of pushback, probably
yeah,
from the traditional communities, which don't want to hear a low carb thing. But oddly, they're actually promoting that. And so we may actually get a bit of movement just thanks to that venture.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. I think people like Tim Noakes and Nina Teicholz and Zoe Harkin, they've been working so hard and relentlessly for the past decade or so to really try and change these nutritional
Yes.
guidelines. And even just simply the fact that people can hear that fat is not bad,
Yes.
saturated fat
Yes.
doesn't increase your heart disease risk, and so on. Even just hearing these things, and even just the focus on protein. Yes, then we see all these big companies making all these different bars with 20 grams
Yes.
of extra protein,
Yeah.
but the concept, just understanding what is protein. Most people don't even really know what part of their plate is protein.
And why? Yeah.
I agree. We could say whatever we want about the administration and all the rest of it, but the fact that they're just opening that conversation
Yeah.
about eating real food,
And
yeah,
actually asking the medical schools to start teaching about the importance of nutrition, which is just
yeah.
amazing. That's
And
amazing.
I think they also said recently that they were going to, I don't know exactly how, or I don't know exactly what, but those guidelines are going to be implemented in hospitals for hospital food,
That would be
which,
amazing. Yeah,
yeah, I
truly
mean,
amazing. Okay, I was wondering if you could tell us about your IKRT company that you're CEO of. What is it
yeah.
that you actually do in your practice?
So it's quite exciting because, as I said in the beginning, I wanted to be a clinical psychologist and help people. And then I got sidetracked with
Yes.
the ketogenic thing. But once I finished my PhD and I realized how effective this could be, I was able to go and become a metabolic psychiatry practitioner, so through the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. And as a chartered psychologist, I was able to open up my practice. So I work online, which means I can see people all around the world, and I work kind of one-on-one and in groups. And I implement ketogenic therapy with people specifically for mental health, but also with people who are looking to just improve their metabolic health, and work with them quite closely to implement this, see great improvements and support people along the way, and then also support them beyond implementation. Because
Yeah.
especially within the food addiction world, that the ongoing support
Yes,
is crucial,
absolutely.
absolutely crucial,
Yeah,
because there's one thing doing it and seeing that it works, and it's another thing sustaining it when your mother-in-law is trying to feed you apple pie, or you're on an
exactly.
airplane and you're trying not to eat the pretzels, like
Yeah.
this kind of thing. So I've got a beautiful community now. We've got 60 or so people in there, and we're
Uh,
meeting every week, and everybody's getting supported and supporting one another. Anybody that's interested in improving their metabolic health and mental health with ketogenic therapies,
so,
then
so somebody in our community who's struggling with food addiction might see your community as an option of help.
yeah, absolutely. Even there are the Liberate program in the UK. I was working with Ellen Bennett on that Liberate program and doing the research around that. And People there were able to reduce their crave scores and YFASs and improve their outcomes there, reduce the food addiction. And now I have some of those individuals who have come into my community on the back of that. So they've targeted specifically the food addiction, and then they've come into the community. Likewise, people just starting out, if you are dealing with food addiction, then we can work together from the get-go.
What about if they also have issues like ADHD or bipolar? You can deal with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you seen effect of ketogenic diet on ADHD symptoms, on bipolar 2 symptoms?
Yeah, absolutely. And so what often happens is people don't often just have one diagnosis.
Right.
They have multiple diagnoses, right? They'll have a primary diagnosis, might be bipolar 1 or 2, and then they'll also have ADHD, maybe a bit of autism, that type of thing. And food addiction just seems to come along for the ride, to be honest, with most people, whether it's medication or it was there before, who knows, chicken and egg. But yes, great improvements with both bipolar and ADHD. And ADHD is a funny one. You would think, okay, we don't really know. Is it neurological? Is it mental health? Is it this, that, the other? Is it evolutionary? But what I can tell you is I've had many people who struggle to take the medications given to them for ADHD, like they're too sensitive. So they haven't taken them and they've really struggled with their symptoms. Then they've gone into ketosis and they've said to me that being in ketosis feels like taking a low dose medication for ADHD. And then back to our conversation about exogenous ketones. They also say that they stay in ketosis and they feel good. And then if they have something really big they have to work on, like they have to go to a meeting and concentrate for a couple of hours, or they have to do something that requires like a big project, they'll take exogenous ketones to help them for that block. And so the diet with the exogenous ketones, that's the one diagnosis where I will say exogenous ketones really could be quite beneficial for you here alongside the diet. So
rather than taking extra Vyvanse or Concerta or Ritalin, you can take exogenous ketones.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is next for you? You had your paper published in Frontiers. I don't know if you want to say something about that, or just what are your next questions that you have?
Yeah, so the exciting thing is the most recent paper that I just put out just only last month, was the group program that I have through IKRT, so Ketogenic Therapy for Mental Health. That was with 19 people, and I just published that in Frontiers, and the outcomes were great on depression and anxiety and so on. And now, just last year, I won an award and I got some money to do a larger study. So this will be with 40 people, again, looking at the same program that I have. The main goal is does it work? Which the first study shows that it does, but this is going to be more people. So we'll see, does it work for these people too? It's specifically in depression and anxiety this time instead of being a mix. And the research question is one, does it work? And two, is it scalable? If we are able to get these results with this specific program, if it works and then it's scalable, great. Where are we going? Are we going to Alaska with it? Are we going to ask some big companies to put it in as part of their employee wellness thing? Are we going to go to the middle of Australia? People who are geographically barren, like they can't get to see somebody face to face. Can we send it there if they've got internet connection and support them? So that's what I'm most excited about, is we know that ketogenic therapy can work for so many people, but how do we get it to the people that either can't get out of bed because they're so depressed, but you get to reach them in their own home through the internet, or they are in the middle of nowhere and there's no psychiatrist around? We can help them. That's what I'm excited about.
It looks to me like you're not only research minded, but also very clinically minded. How can I apply this research knowledge in an actual practical setting that will be useful for clients?
Exactly, because I think what's the point in knowing if you're not doing anything with it?
Academics can be like that, right? You can just learn stuff that's of not really any clinical use, but it sounds like you're very determined to make it clinically useful, which is great.
I'll try. I'm trying my best anyway.
I wish you all the best with that. Okay, we have one last signature question that we ask everybody. If you could tell a younger version of yourself something about the ketogenic diet, what would it be?
I think it goes back to what I said in the beginning, which is when I was younger, I was all about psychology. It was biopsychosocial model. And I would go back and I would say to my younger self, not skip the psycho and the social, it's extremely important, but it's not what you think. It's not all psychological and sociological. It's biological and predominantly so, I believe.
It's the food, it's the diet.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
the food, it's the diet, it's our metabolic state. And you cannot ignore that. You can do all the therapies in the world and have all the support in the world, but if you don't fix the metabolism and the food that you're eating, you're not going to get there, or you're going to struggle to stay there. So that's what I would say. I say it's not what you think, and it's more about the bio than the psycho and the social. But together, it's all three.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed our talk today.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much, Vera. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group, I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.